inside the walls of Adwell Prison in West Lothian, Scotland, a place where routine turned into scandal and where boundaries blurred in ways no one saw coming. But here's the question that lingers. What drives someone to risk it all? A career, a reputation, and in some cases, freedom itself. In the summer of 2021, a scandal exploded onto the scene, leaving everyone asking, how could this happen? Our story begins with Rachel Wilson, a fresh-faced prison officer who had only just stepped into the role a few months earlier. Little did she know, her career was about to make headlines, but not for the reasons she hoped. Kevin Hogg, an inmate serving a 3-year sentence for traffic offenses, was at the center of it all. But here's the twist. This wasn't just another story of inmate rebellion or violence. No, this was something far more personal and far more shocking. It started innocently enough, or so it seemed. Rachel, a new officer eager to prove herself, crossed paths with Kevin Hogg during her rounds. But beneath the surface of this professional interaction, something was brewing. What did this video show, you ask? Kevin Hogg, confident and calculated, had set up a hidden phone in his cell. Imagine this, a sleek, white-walled room where every movement echoes, a space meant for confinement, turned into the scene of an unfolding scandal. In the footage, Hogg moves around his cell like a man with a plan. He adjusts the camera, takes a sip of water as if preparing for something monumental, and then waits. Seconds later, Rachel Wilson appears at the door. And that's when it happens, a kiss. A moment so brief yet so explosive, it changed the narrative forever. Now let's pause and ask ourselves, why would a seasoned inmate like Kevin Hogg risk recording such a moment? Was this an act of manipulation, or was it something else entirely? Initially, speculation ran wild. Some said Rachel Wilson was being blackmailed. Others believed she had been coerced into the kiss. After all, why would a professional willingly engage in such behavior? But the clues began to tell a different story. Hogg, it seemed, wasn't holding onto the footage to control Rachel. No, he was using it for bragging rights. The video spread like wildfire through the prison, shared among inmates and even reaching staff at Ballini Prison in Glasgow. Here's the chilling part. The evidence didn't support coercion. Rachel's body language didn't indicate fear. She didn't press her panic button. Was this an error in judgment or something more deliberate? The investigation that followed brought Rachel Wilson's career to a screeching halt. Suspended from her duties, she faced scrutiny from all sides. But as authorities dug deeper, the story grew even murkier. Why didn't Rachel report the incident immediately? What led her to that cell, knowing the risks involved? And most importantly, how did Kevin Hogg, a man confined behind bars, manage to orchestrate such a scandal? Theories crumbled as the facts emerged. What seemed like a case of manipulation turned out to be something simpler yet more tragic, a lapse in judgment that would haunt Rachel Wilson forever. Temptation? And how do we ensure that boundaries in such environments remain intact? Rachel Wilson's story is more than just a scandal. It's a cautionary tale about the dangers of crossing professional lines and the devastating consequences that follow. But we're just getting started. This is only one story among many. Stay with us as we uncover more shocking tales of deception, manipulation, and betrayal behind prison walls. Uncovered? In our next story, we'll delve into another shocking case, one where love, lies, and manipulation took center stage. Stay tuned and remember, the truth is often stranger than fiction. Let's shift our focus to another story, one that begins with ambition, naivety, and a desire to make a difference. This is the story of Joanne Hunter, a bright and determined young woman with a future that seemed full of promise. Imagine this. It's December 2018. Joanne, fresh out of university with a master's degree in childhood and youth studies, lands her first job as a prison officer at HMP Forest Bank in Salford. A challenging role, no doubt, but Joanne was ready, or so she thought. What she didn't realize was that her determination to succeed would soon be tested in ways she couldn't imagine. And at the heart of it all, a man named Connor Willis. Connor Willis wasn't just another inmate. Known for his arrogance and ties to a criminal gang, he carried an air of confidence that masked a manipulative streak. To Joanne, he was initially just another face in the prison, a man to be managed, not trusted. But here's where things take a turn. Slowly, Willis began to chip away at her defenses. He spotted her vulnerabilities, her inexperience, and most importantly, her desire to be liked. And then, it happened. A connection formed. Was it genuine affection, or was it part of a calculated plan? By early 2019, the relationship between Joanne and Connor began to deepen. Joanne, described later as naive and vulnerable, found herself drawn to his charm. But let me ask you this. How often do we mistake manipulation for love? Connor Willis didn't waste time. Once he had Joanne's trust, he made his move. His request? Smuggle packages into the prison. Think about this for a moment. Joanne, a newly hired officer with everything to lose, was now risking it all for an inmate she barely knew. Why? Because she believed in his declarations of love. The operation was simple, at least on the surface. Joanne would meet an unnamed woman at a Tesco supermarket to collect the packages. She'd then smuggle them into the prison and hand them off to another inmate, a member of Willis's gang. What's shocking is this. Despite being offered $200 to $300 per package, Joanne refused the money. Her actions weren't driven by greed, but by a misguided sense of loyalty. But here's the question. How far would you go for someone you thought you loved? By December 2020, suspicions around Joanne's activities had reached a boiling point. Whispers turned into formal complaints, and prison authorities decided it was time to act. During questioning, the truth began to unravel. Joanne admitted to the relationship with Willis and confessed to smuggling packages. But what came next shocked everyone. A search of her belongings revealed explicit photos and messages exchanged with Willis, messages that detailed the contents of the packages, including substances hidden inside everyday items like juice cartons and Red Bull cans. The evidence was overwhelming. Joanne had crossed every line, betraying her colleagues, her role, and even herself. But was this truly her fault? Or was she, as her lawyer later argued, a victim of manipulation? When Joanne's case went to court, the narrative took another turn. Her lawyer painted a picture of a young woman out of her depth, a naive individual who had spent her life focused on education, leaving her inexperienced in matters of the heart. She was ripe for the picking, the lawyer argued, an easy target for an unscrupulous criminal. But the court wasn't entirely convinced. The judge, weighing the evidence, emphasized the seriousness of Joanne's actions. Her choices had compromised prison security, increased criminal activity, and endangered lives. The sentence? 3 years in prison. But let me ask you this. Was justice truly served? Or was Joanne another victim in a system that failed to protect her from manipulation? Joanne Hunter's story is a sobering reminder of how quickly ambition can turn into tragedy. But it's not the only one. What happens when power is abused in places meant to uphold the law? In our next story, we'll uncover another scandal that rocked the prison system, a tale of betrayal, coercion, and consequences. Stay tuned and remember, every story has a lesson, and sometimes those lessons come at the highest cost. Zula Santiago seemed to have it all, a stable job, a promising career, and the trust of her colleagues. At just 28 years old, she worked as a correctional officer at the Union County Detention Center in Spartanburg, South Carolina. But as we've seen time and again, appearances can be deceiving. Her role required vigilance, professionalism, and a strict adherence to ethical standards. Yet Zula's story is one of boundaries crossed and responsibilities forsaken. But let's pause for a moment. Have you ever wondered what happens when a line you swore you'd never cross suddenly seems blurry? For Zula, that line became impossible to see. It started innocently, or at least that's what Zula may have told herself. A series of conversations with an inmate whose name remains undisclosed, a rapport formed. But was this just harmless interaction, or was it the beginning of something darker? The inmate, serving time for undisclosed crimes, managed to form a bond with Zula. Slowly, their conversations became more personal. Day by day, the professional distance faded, and then it happened. Reports later revealed that Zula had crossed a line that no correctional officer should. She engaged in intimate encounters with the inmate, acts that went far beyond inappropriate. But here's the real question. Was Zula a willing participant, or was she manipulated by a cunning inmate who knew exactly what to say? It didn't take long for suspicions to arise. In a tightly controlled environment like a detention center, secrets rarely stay hidden for long. An investigation began, and the truth started to emerge. When confronted with the evidence, Zula admitted to her actions. Her career was over in an instant. She was relieved of her duties and charged with 2 counts of first-degree sexual misconduct with an inmate. But let's think about this. Was Zula's downfall entirely her own doing? Or was she caught in a web of power dynamics, poor judgment, and misplaced trust? The scandal sent shockwaves through the Union County Detention Center. Colleagues who once respected Zula now questioned how such a breach of ethics could happen. But beyond the headlines, there were deeper implications. Cases like Zula's raise critical questions about the vulnerabilities in our prison systems. How do we prevent these relationships from forming? And more importantly, how do we ensure that both officers and inmates are held accountable? As the dust settled, Zula's sentence remained undisclosed to the public, but the damage to her reputation, career, and life was irreversible. Let's not forget, in a prison setting, power dynamics are everything. A relationship between an officer and an inmate is not just inappropriate, it's illegal. Zula's story is a chilling reminder of what can happen when those dynamics are ignored. And yet some argue that she, too, was a victim of manipulation, a victim of her own vulnerabilities. But what do you think? Where do we draw the line between accountability and coercion? Zula Santiago's fall from grace is another chapter in our exploration of scandal, power, and betrayal. But the story doesn't end here. Next, we'll delve into the tale of Tina Gonzalez, a woman whose actions not only shocked her colleagues, but redefined the boundaries of betrayal within a prison's walls. Stay tuned, because as you'll soon discover, the most shocking stories are the ones you never see coming. Tina Gonzalez was the kind of officer that everyone seemed to admire. Joining the Fresno County jail staff in 2016 at just 26 years old, she was known for her dedication, her work ethic, and her ability to handle the pressures of her job. But as we've learned, even the most promising careers can hide the deepest secrets. For 3 years, Tina maintained a spotless record. Yet, behind her composed exterior, a storm was brewing, one that would forever tarnish her reputation. Let me ask you, what drives a person to jeopardize everything they've worked for? The truth began to surface thanks to an anonymous tip. The sheriff's office received information about contraband being smuggled into the jail and something far more scandalous, a secret relationship between Tina and a male inmate. What investigators uncovered was worse than they imagined. Tina wasn't just smuggling items like cell phones and razors. She was using her position to engage in a relationship with an inmate, providing him with insider information to avoid detection during inspections. Here's the shocking part. Tina had allegedly cut a hole in her uniform to facilitate their encounters, a bold and blatant disregard for every rule she was sworn to uphold. But let me ask you, how does someone go from upholding the law to breaking it so brazenly? As investigators delved deeper, they uncovered irrefutable evidence against Tina. Phone calls, smuggled items, and accounts from other inmates painted a clear picture of her betrayal. But what made this case even more alarming was Tina's behavior after being caught. Phone records revealed that she continued to contact the inmate, showing no signs of remorse or regret. Let's take a moment to reflect. Was this defiance, denial, or simply someone trapped in their own web of poor decisions? When Tina's case went to trial, it was clear that the stakes were high. Prosecutors argued that her actions had put the safety of her colleagues and the entire facility at risk. They pushed for a sentence that would reflect the seriousness of her crimes. On the other hand, her defense attorney painted a different picture. He described Tina as a vulnerable woman who had just ended her marriage and made a series of bad decisions during a difficult time in her life. But let's not forget, vulnerability doesn't absolve accountability. The court's decision? Tina was sentenced to 2 years of probation and 7 months in the county jail, a far cry from the 3 years and 8 months she could have faced. The sentence sparked outrage among some who felt it was too lenient given the risks Tina had posed to the jail's security. Others argued that it was fair, considering her willingness to take responsibility for her actions. But here's the question that lingers. Was justice truly served? Tina Gonzalez's story is a stark reminder of how quickly boundaries can be crossed and trust can be broken. But as shocking as her case is, it's not the last. In our next segment, we'll explore the story of Nesha Nele, a case that will leave you questioning the fine line between personal struggles and professional responsibilities. Stay tuned, because the deeper we go, the more unsettling these stories become. Nesha Nele was like many young professionals, stepping into a new career with hope and ambition. For 18 months, she served as a corrections officer in Butler County, Ohio. The job was challenging, but it came with a sense of purpose, a chance to make a difference. But, as we've learned, even the best intentions can be derailed by temptation and poor decisions. The cracks in Nesha's story began to show when a sharp-eyed corrections sergeant noticed something unusual, suspicious behavior, red flags, and a hunch that something wasn't quite right. Here's a question to consider. How much can one small detail unravel an entire career? The sergeant's concerns led to an internal investigation, and soon shocking evidence began to surface. Nesha was found to have smuggled contraband into the jail, items that included a cell phone and electronic cigarettes. While these might seem minor, in a controlled environment like a jail, they represent a significant security risk. But this wasn't just about smuggling. The investigation revealed something far more serious. Nesha had entered into a relationship with a male inmate. Take a moment to imagine the complexity of this situation. Was Nesha acting out of personal feelings, or was she being manipulated by someone who saw her vulnerabilities as an opportunity? When questioned, Nesha didn't deny the allegations. In fact, she made a confession that left investigators stunned. She admitted to smuggling the contraband and to engaging in a sexual relationship with the inmate. The admission raised even more questions. How long had this been going on? And how had it gone unnoticed for so long? But here's the most haunting question. What drives someone to cross these lines, knowing the consequences could be life-altering? Counts of sexual battery and illegal conveyance of a communication device into the jail. But as the case moved to court, a new layer of complexity emerged. Nesha was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, a condition that her defense argued made her more susceptible to manipulation by the inmate. This revelation added a twist to an already complicated story. Was Nesha a criminal, a victim, or both? In the end, Nesha pleaded guilty to 1 count of sexual battery. The court sentenced her to 2 years in prison, a punishment that left many wondering if it was too harsh or too lenient. During her sentencing, Nesha addressed the court with a heartfelt statement. "I understand that I broke the law," she said. "I've disappointed my colleagues, my community, and myself. But I am determined to take responsibility and rebuild my life." Let's reflect for a moment. Can a single mistake, or even a series of them, define someone forever? Nesha Nilay's story is one of ambition, vulnerability, and the devastating consequences of poor choices. But as we've seen, her story is far from unique. Up next, we'll explore the shocking case of Kawana Jenkins, a tale that shook the walls of Fulton County Jail and raised new questions about ethics and accountability. Stay tuned, because the deeper we dig, the darker these stories become. In Fulton County Jail, routine is everything. Routine keeps order. Routine prevents chaos. But what happens when a simple routine shakedown uncovers something that shatters the trust within the system? This is the story of Kawana Jenkins, a detention officer whose actions turned a routine security check into a headline-grabbing scandal. During a standard contraband search, deputies stumbled upon a cell phone, an item that should never have been in an inmate's possession. But it wasn't the phone itself that caused the biggest stir. It was what they found on it. Here's the question: how does something so seemingly minor escalate into a career-ending revelation? Among the files on the confiscated phone was a video. What deputies saw next would send shockwaves not only through Fulton County Jail, but also the wider community. The footage showed Kawana Jenkins in her uniform engaging in an intimate act with an inmate. The inmate's hand appeared in the frame, and Kawana was seen performing a lewd act. It's hard to imagine what the deputies must have felt as they watched the footage. Shock? Disappointment? Or a sinking realization of the betrayal within their ranks? The evidence was undeniable. Kawana's face, and even her badge, were clearly visible in the video. But let me ask you, how does someone go from upholding the law to breaking it so boldly? Sexual contact and cruelty to inmates. As the investigation unfolded, another layer of betrayal came to light. The inmate in the video was a well-known figure within the facility, and while he tried to avoid being identified, the tattoos on his hands gave him away. But here's the real twist. How much of this relationship was consensual, and how much of it was driven by coercion or manipulation? Kawana Jenkins had once worn her uniform as a symbol of authority and responsibility, but now that same uniform had become a symbol of disgrace. She was relieved of her duties, and her name became synonymous with scandal. The once respected officer was now facing a future that seemed bleak and uncertain. But let's pause for a moment. Is this simply a story of personal failure? Or does it highlight deeper flaws within the system, flaws that allow these relationships to form in the first place? The fallout from Kawana Jenkins' actions extended far beyond her own career. The incident raised serious questions about the culture within Fulton County Jail. How was the contraband phone smuggled in? And more importantly, how could such a blatant breach of ethics go unnoticed? As of now, Kawana's sentence remains undisclosed. But one thing is certain: her actions have left a lasting stain on the reputation of the jail and its officers. Here's a final thought. In a system built on trust and accountability, how do we ensure that stories like Kawana's become a thing of the past? Kawana Jenkins' story is yet another chapter in this series of scandals that challenge our understanding of ethics, power, and betrayal. But we're not done yet. In our next segment, we'll dive into the story of Gemma Sipiwe, a case that begins with kindness but ends in chaos. Stay tuned, because the closer we get to the end, the more shocking these stories become. Kindness is often seen as a virtue, but what happens when that kindness is taken too far? This is the story of Gemma Sipiwe, a 27-year-old correctional officer whose career and reputation unraveled in the most unexpected way. In July 2014, Gemma was known for her professionalism and dedication to her job at St. Clair County Jail. She was reliable, respected, and trusted to uphold the highest standards. But everything changed when she crossed paths with a female inmate. What began as routine interactions soon transformed into something much more personal. Here's a question: how do small moments of kindness spiral into actions that can destroy a career? It started with a connection, a mutual sense of understanding between Gemma and the inmate. While it's unclear what drew them together, their relationship began to blur the lines between professional and personal. The tipping point came in the spring when the inmate was granted a work release program. This allowed her to leave the jail during the day, a rare privilege that few inmates are granted. But this newfound freedom became the foundation for a secret that would bring Gemma's life crashing down. The inmate began visiting Gemma's home, initially under the guise of using her shower during lunch breaks. What may have started as an innocent gesture of goodwill soon escalated into a deeply inappropriate relationship. But let me ask you this: at what point does kindness become complicity? By April 2015, rumors of the relationship began circulating within the jail. Whispers turned into formal complaints, prompting the St. Clair County Sheriff's Department to launch an investigation. As evidence mounted, Gemma was placed on administrative leave. The investigation revealed that the inmate had been visiting Gemma's home regularly, a clear violation of professional boundaries. The shockwaves were immediate. Gemma, once seen as a model officer, was now at the center of a scandal that threatened to tarnish the reputation of the entire department. But here's the real question: how does a relationship like this go unnoticed for so long in such a controlled environment? On April 24, 2015, a warrant was issued for Gemma's arrest. She was charged with sexual assault with intent to commit penetration, a 10-year felony that carried severe consequences. The public was stunned as the case unfolded. The media painted Gemma as a cautionary tale, while the department faced criticism for failing to prevent such a breach of ethics. But let's pause for a moment. Was Gemma's story one of intentional wrongdoing, or was she simply caught in a web of poor decisions and misplaced trust? When Gemma's case went to court, the weight of her actions became clear. During the sentencing hearing, Judge Daniel Kelly emphasized the gravity of her betrayal, stating, "No judge should have to worry that a person sentenced to jail will be subject to any kind of abuse." Gemma ultimately pleaded guilty to a lesser charge as part of a plea deal. She was sentenced to 10 months in jail, with 4 months suspended upon payment of fines and court costs. But the damage was done. Her career, her reputation, and her future were irreparably altered. Here's a question to reflect on. Was this sentence enough to serve as a deterrent for others? Or does it highlight systemic vulnerabilities that need to be addressed? Gemma CPU's story is a chilling reminder of how even the smallest lapses in judgment can lead to life-altering consequences. But her case is far from the only one. Next, we'll uncover the scandal at HMP Wandsworth, a story that exposes corruption, chaos, and betrayal within one of the UK's most infamous prisons. Stay tuned, because as we near the end, the stories only grow more shocking. HMP Wandsworth is one of the oldest and most infamous prisons in the United Kingdom. Built in 1851, it has seen more than its fair share of scandals, corruption, and controversy. Originally designed to house both male and female inmates, it now operates as a Category B men's prison, home to some of the most dangerous offenders in the country. But what happens when the ones enforcing the rules are the very ones breaking them? In June 2024, a shocking video surfaced that revealed a level of lawlessness within Wandsworth that few could have imagined. Here's a question: How does a facility designed to maintain order descend into such chaos? The video began circulating online, filmed inside one of the smaller units of the prison. At first glance, it seemed to capture a typical day behind bars. But as the footage unfolded, the truth became undeniable. Two male inmates were seen casually lounging in their cell, surrounded by contraband, items that should never have been allowed inside. Cigarettes, phones, and even illicit substances were openly displayed. But that wasn't the most shocking part. Moments later, the camera captured a female correctional officer engaging in an intimate act with one of the inmates. The officer, still in her uniform, appeared completely at ease, as if her actions were part of a twisted routine. Let me ask you this. What drives someone to betray the very institution they swore to protect? The video was a stark reminder of the corruption that had been rumored to plague HMP Wandsworth for years. It wasn't just about one officer. It was about a culture that allowed such behavior to go unchecked. As the footage circulated online, outrage grew. Calls for justice rang out, and the public demanded answers. How had contraband been smuggled in so easily, and how had the officer been allowed to engage in such blatant misconduct? But here's the chilling part. This wasn't an isolated incident. For years, Wandsworth had been criticized for its harsh conditions, overcrowding, and lack of oversight. The video was simply the latest chapter in a long history of dysfunction. The female officer was quickly identified thanks to the clear view of her face and badge in the video. She was immediately relieved of her duties and taken into custody. But as the investigation progressed, more questions emerged. Was she coerced into her actions? Was she complicit in smuggling the contraband? Or was this a case of a deeper systemic issue within the prison? While the officer's identity has not been publicly revealed, the incident has cast a long shadow over HMP Wandsworth. Officials have promised a thorough investigation, but for many, the damage has already been done. At the heart of this story lies a betrayal, not just of the officer's colleagues, but of the public trust. Prisons are meant to uphold the law, not become places where it is blatantly ignored. But let's reflect for a moment. Is this just the fault of one individual, or does this case highlight a larger issue, a failure of oversight, accountability, and leadership within the system? HMP Wandsworth scandal is a stark reminder of the dangers of corruption and complacency. But as shocking as this story is, it's not the end. Next, we'll examine the final chapter in this series, a story of shocking betrayal, hidden motives, and the devastating consequences of poor choices. Stay tuned, because as we approach the final segment, the most jaw-dropping revelations are yet to come. Throughout these stories, we've seen a disturbing pattern, a chain of betrayal, poor judgment, and shattered trust. From Rachel Wilson's fateful decision to cross professional lines to Kawana Jenkins' blatant misconduct, each case reveals a troubling dynamic in environments where control is everything. But here's the question that lingers. Are these stories about individual failures, or do they expose deeper systemic flaws? Let's reflect on what we've uncovered so far. Behind every scandal lies a common denominator: vulnerability. Whether it's emotional, psychological, or situational, vulnerability plays a critical role in the decisions that lead to these shocking outcomes. Rachel Wilson, fresh on the job, was inexperienced and possibly manipulated. Joanne Hunter, desperate for affection, fell for an inmate's charm. Zula Santiago, a trusted officer, let personal feelings cloud her judgment. And the list goes on. But here's the chilling truth. Vulnerability is not an excuse. It's a warning sign. A sign that stronger safeguards and support systems are needed to prevent these betrayals from happening again. Now let's turn our attention to the institutions themselves. Prisons are designed to be secure, tightly controlled environments. Yet time and again, we've seen breaches that make us question the very foundation of these systems. How do contraband phones, substances, and other prohibited items find their way into inmates' hands? How do relationships that violate every rule of conduct go unnoticed until it's too late? The answers point to a lack of oversight, insufficient training, and, in some cases, a culture of complacency. But here's the real question. How can these systems be fixed before the next scandal erupts? The consequences of these actions ripple far beyond the individuals involved. Careers are ruined, lives are disrupted, and the integrity of the justice system is called into question. For every officer who crosses the line, trust is eroded. For every contraband item smuggled in, security is compromised. And for every inappropriate relationship, the balance of power shifts in dangerous ways. But let's pause for a moment. Can this damage ever be fully repaired? As we close this chapter, it's important to ask, what can be done to prevent these stories from repeating? Stricter oversight, enhanced training, better support for officers? Perhaps it's all of the above. What's clear is that these stories are not just about individuals. They're about the systems that fail to protect them and the environments that foster such betrayals. Here's one final question for you. Can the lessons of these stories lead to meaningful change? Or are they destined to be forgotten until the next headline appears? These stories have taken us behind the walls of some of the world's most secure facilities, revealing secrets that many would prefer to keep hidden. They are stories of betrayal, manipulation, and consequences, but they are also stories of humanity, with all its flaws and complexities. As we close this chapter, remember, the truth is often stranger than fiction, and the line between right and wrong is rarely as clear as it seems. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If you've been captivated by these tales, don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned. Because while these stories may have ended, the search for truth never does.